So we are coming at you from our home studios. So welcome to the cityCURRENT home studio here in my house, but doing everything virtually, obviously. But this is a powerful opportunity for us to bring on our friends, bring on business and community leaders to share what's going on in their world, how they're inspiring others, get to know them personally. So we're using this as an opportunity to still power the good, as we like to say, with our mission with cityCURRENT. So we're honored to have a good friend of mine. He's someone who has professionally and personally been in my life for a long time and helped mentor me and guide cityCURRENT, a huge part of the cityCURRENT storyline. And he's got an amazing next chapter, if you will, in terms of releasing a book and sharing his story and inspiring people all around the world with his story and some tenets that he will be sharing. So let's start out. Michael Drake, coming from your home, obviously, but how are you doing, Michael?
I'm doing great, Jeremy. It's always great to be with you, even if it's virtually today.
Absolutely. So you on your end, though, are used to virtual and used to technology. And so this is something that you've seen. It's a big part of your storyline, although you always like to say that you weren't necessarily the one that was doing it. You were the one kind of the visionary to create the company. But on your end, you know, Master IT was a big part of your storyline. Give viewers, in this case, a little bit of just who Michael Drake is, your story of growing up in Memphis. We'll dive in there, and then we'll kind of take this all over the place and have some fun.
Sure, thanks. Well, let's have some fun. I'm a native Memphian. That's 57 years. I'm very, very proud of that. Graduated from then Memphis State. Began my career as a banker. So yeah, the story about Master IT is I didn't turn the screwdriver. I just drove the bus. But I started my career in the savings and loan industry in the late 80s when it was in crisis. And I ended up working for the government for 3 years as a crisis manager, bailing out savings and loans. I then came to Econocom USA, which is a very storied Memphis company. It was a subsidiary of the global Econocom Group, a French publicly traded company, which is the largest IT services company in all of Europe. They were in stress and crisis at that time. That's why I was brought in to help restructure the company. And then became the CEO and was there for 15 years until I started Master IT. And that was 15 years ago. So I've had a 35-year career that has spanned banking and finance as well as technology.
You share it in the book, the story, but I want you to share a little bit of it just because I think it's not really funny, but it's funny looking back. But you know, you go and you basically approached the CEO of Econocom globally and said, "Hey, I'd like to go in with you together on this." Share his kind of story and you know, that hard lesson of being an entrepreneur and taking that next step on your own.
Yeah, well, his name is Jean-Louis Bouchard, and he is the chairman and founder of the Econocom Group. And he's not only my business mentor, but he's a father figure to me as well. And so, yeah, I had the idea to start the company, and I went to him, and I wanted to do it outside of the publicly traded company, just a venture between the two of us. And I thought he thought it would be a great idea. And not only did he say no, he said, "You're fired." But he did it in a great way. He gave me a great severance package, and he tore up my non-compete. And he said, "Mike, if you're ever going to put your big boy pants on and become an entrepreneur, now is the time. You have my blessing, and any intellectual property that we've developed together is yours. You're free to have it, and good luck." And that's been 15 years ago, and we just spent the Christmas holiday with he and his family. It was kind of my way of saying thank you as I exited Master IT.
Yeah. And so talk about exiting Master IT, because Master IT, obviously the company you built, but just recently sold it, which then creates this next chapter and opportunity in your life. But, you know, you see this as a huge opportunity to kind of up the ante, so to speak. So talk about VC3 stepping into Memphis.
Yeah, well, just some backstory on Master IT. So we founded it as a technology as a service provider, which means basically it's the outsourced IT function for the small and medium business. And we were blessed in the Mid-South area to really serve so many different types of verticals. We learned a lot in the process and were able to help a lot of people. But you know, I was ready to make a transition, to pivot myself. I've been feeling a calling to do something different for quite a while. And VC3 from Columbia, South Carolina, which is a venture-backed IT provider, stepped into the picture, and they had some great complementary services that we didn't have. They had a much more robust cloud offer, which really bodes well for Memphis and the Mid-South as we live through this crisis now. And their culture was very, very similar. So it was very important to me, not only for the company, but certainly our team members and our clients in the market as well, that we found the right fit. So we did, and we closed on that transaction in November of 2019. And that left me free to enter this third act of my life. But before I get to that, I do want to talk about something that we don't talk about enough of, I think, and that is our involvement with cityCURRENT, and for me personally. We were a charter member, which means that we were here in the very beginning, 15 years ago. And as a charter member, we were able to bring a speaker each year to our breakfast series, as well as participate in all the events that you conduct every year. And it was life-changing for me, Jeremy. I mean, really, if you really connect the dots of all the people that I've met, interacted with, like you, who've become dear friends, the speakers that we've had changed the trajectory of my life. Many of them are dear friends. Liz Murray, who you just did a conversation with, came to Memphis and stayed in my home. She also went with me to get Father Greg Boyle in Los Angeles to come and speak at our last breakfast, which I was so grateful for with that. Javier Pena, who was someone I met through Tom Shadyac, which I'll talk about in a minute, actually helped me write the book. We became that close, and I could go on and on and on. And I know that so many of your guests have so many of these stories that I hope one day you will write a book all about cityCURRENT and all of the connections that all of us have made.
Well, we basically have to write it together. When you look at Tom Shadyac and even like people like John Bon Jovi, I mean, it goes on and on and on. That to steal your phrase, it's like you couldn't make this up if you tried.
You can't make this stuff up. So yeah, the story about Tom kind of leads me into the book and my next chapter. I really had it on my heart 6 years ago to start a conversation in the business community about mental health. And because at that time it was still a very stigmatized subject. It still is today, not as much as it was then. We still have a lot of work to do. But the harder we looked, the harder it became to find the right person. And one night I got a call from your right-hand person, Allison Carson, and she said, "Mike, I found the guy." And I said, "Okay, tell me." And she said, "Have you heard the name Tom Shadyac?" I said, "No." I knew the Shadyac name because his father co-founded St. Jude Children's Research Hospital here in Memphis with Danny Thomas and others. And of course, his brother Rick is the CEO of ALSAC, which raises almost $2 million a day to fight and cure childhood cancer. I knew that name, but I didn't know Tom.
St. Jude shirt right now.
There you go. And as I later came to find out, he was the famous Hollywood director, Ace Ventura, Liar Liar, Patch Adams, Bruce Almighty, Evan Almighty, Nutty Professor, go on and on. But the movie that she turned me on was a documentary called I Am. And in I Am, Tom defines himself as mentally ill. And what he meant by that is seeing things not the way they are, but we see things the way that we are. And he wrote a book, it's a New York Times bestseller called Life's Operating Manual, which is still so relevant today. And so you and I had to do a little legwork to get him to speak, but he did. And it literally changed my life. And I think it had a big impact on him as well. He was teaching right under our nose at the University of Memphis, a class called Storytelling in Life that my now 26-year-old daughter was taking 6 years ago. So I went to the class after that breakfast to thank him, and I never left. He asked me to stick around, and I was in that class for 3 years. And the story just goes on and on. You mentioned John Bon Jovi. Tom had this vision to start what is now One Family Memphis and Memphis Rocks. And he tried to buy so many different properties in Memphis. Just it wasn't working out. And I had the opportunity to introduce him to another cityCURRENT member, which is Cushman Wakefield Commercial Advisors, Larry Jensen and Greg Spilliards. And they worked with him to buy the Newtown property across from Stax and the Soulsville Museum and the charter school. And that has now become Memphis Rocks. And it's really been a game changer in our community. And it started with Tom. And then this momentum just kept coming from all of these speakers, ending with Father Boyle just last month, of how I'm connected to that. But the way we got involved with the Bon Jovis is when I got involved with Tom, I said, if I'm going to be involved in your project, I want to really understand other business models that do the same thing that you do. And so he recommended that I go to the Haven, which is in Virginia, which is a church that he bought in downtown Charlottesville and turned it into a day shelter. and it's an incredible facility. And then we went to New Jersey to visit with Dorothea Bon Jovi at the JBJ Soul Kitchen. The first one was in Toms River, the second one in Red Bank, and they've subsequently opened one on the campus of Rutgers University. And that's a whole nother topic. We could talk about food insecurity on college campuses. But through that, we had a good relationship with Dorothea. Then we took off and we went to Pittsburgh, and we met with another former cityCURRENT speaker, Bill Strickland, who has the Manchester Bidwell Center there. And so again, all these connections that we've made, the Bon Jovis then came to Memphis, looked at Tom's vision. Obviously, part of that vision still is to create a pay-it-forward restaurant based on what the Bon Jovis do there. And the thing I was so attracted to with Dorothea, first of all, she's a beautiful human being, not your typical rock star wife. She's the most down-to-earth person that I know. And so is John. John could be the CEO of any Fortune 500 company. Like, he is the CEO of quite a successful company.
Right.
But she told me, she said, Mike, if I had to do this over again, I would realize that I'm not a restaurant. She says, I'm a mental health facility disguised as a restaurant. And quite frankly, that's what Memphis Rocks is as well. It's not a climbing gym. It's not a community center. It's a mental health facility disguised as those. Because she said, once you feed somebody and you meet their physical need, you only open up the door to what their spiritual and emotional needs are. And that's what they have done so successfully in New Jersey. And we hope that they'll take that concept all around the country and certainly bring it to Memphis and bless us with that here. But, you know, again, all these connections back and forth that I keep talking about, you know, they have behavioral health counselors at the restaurants, and they're navigators. In fact, the greeters, the hostesses are clinically trained psychologists, and they can spot people who are in need and help them navigate the behavioral health needs that they have. Father Boyle, founder of Homeboy Industries, the largest gang intervention and reentry program based in LA, 15,000 adults formerly incarcerated or gang members treated every year. And they have an 18-month training program. In the first 6 months of that program, they don't do anything to treat their trauma. You can imagine people who have been in gangs and been in prison, just the unspeakable traumas that we hear Father Greg talk about when he was here. That's the first thing that they do. So you can tell that's a real passion for me. I come from a long family history of anxiety and depression and even suicide. My paternal grandmother died by suicide when I was 16. Nobody talked about it then. I wasn't able to process that then. Her son, my father, died by suicide 8 years ago. My mother lived with anxiety and depression her entire life. So kind of my joke is that the DNA deck is not exactly stacked in my favor. But it's not just about DNA. And, you know, the traumas that everyone on this planet is facing now because of the coronavirus are manifesting themselves in so many different ways, and ways that will just keep coming out over the next several years. It's something that needs to be destigmatized, and it's something that needs to be talked about openly in the workplace, openly in a family, openly among friends. And that's what I hope to do as I enter the third act of my life, to be able to bring some of that to the world.
I know that he's another friend and another connection and story that goes to cityCURRENT, but Ben Nimpton, he was a big part of The Buried Life, which was one of MTV's top rated shows, but big on the bucket list. And for everything that they crossed off, they helped somebody else fulfill something on their bucket list. And he talks mental health and mental illness is a big part of his platform as well. And you two, you know, talk a lot and talked often about just reframing. So in other words, instead of even saying mental health, mental illness, it's mental fitness, right? So it's putting it in a positive light. And then also too, the way that he kind of says it is, the numbers might be changing, but ultimately it's the same theory, is if it's 1 out of every 5 who struggles with this, or 1 out of every 3, it's not up to that person. It's up to the 4 of the 5 to try to make that person feel normal and invite them to have those conversations. Because to your point, if we try to hide this, then it becomes something that starts to consume. And if we don't realize that, wait a second, there are others who are struggling with this, and it's okay, to seek out help, then that consumes us and drives us down a negative path, versus realizing that there is light. And to your point, realizing that yes, the DNA might be stacked against you. But ultimately now you're armed with so many more resources and so much more power that you can leverage in a positive direction to take control. That becomes an opportunity for you to not only share your story, but also do something powerful with it.
Right, right. Well, and that's why I got involved very early on with the Dennis H. Jones Living Well Network at Methodist Healthcare. Dennis was the former CIO of FedEx. He retired from there, became a competitor of mine at Master IT. And in December of 2009, he took his life. So that goes to show you that behavioral health issues are equal opportunity offenders. Outwardly, he had everything that a successful business person could ever want or have. But he struggled so deeply, his wife didn't know, his pastor didn't know, who happened to be his best friend. And the moment that I got that news, I had this wave of emotions, Jeremy, that came over me. A lot of it was grief and shame for how I felt about that competition in the workplace. He didn't do anything to me. He just did. And Viktor Frankl, who survived the Holocaust, lost his entire family, but his sister wrote Man's Search for Meaning next to the Bible, the most read book ever. And he said, God determines what happens to us. We're 100% responsible for how we go through it. And so at that moment, my story that I just told you, I knew what his story was. And by the grace of God, here I am. And so through a long story, I got to meet his widow, Debbie, and she launched this at Methodist Healthcare and asked me to be its first board member and its public spokesperson. So I spent the last 10 years in the business community telling that story and encouraging people through employee assistance programs or the Dennis H. Jones Living Well Network, which is livingwellnetwork.org, to seek out help and to change the conversation, or at least to have the conversation in the workplace, because leaders are dragging steamer trunks full of baggage of behavioral health issues behind them before the coronavirus. Think about what they're dragging today and consequently what all the team members are. So if people would go to the livingwellnetwork.org, they can take a confidential 9-question survey. It's called a PHQ-9. It will give them immediate results that will tell them where they're doing on a scale in terms of their mental health. It's a hotline with counselors that will help them navigate how and where to get the right help. It's clergy, a network of clergy, and Methodist is now in the process of bringing online behavioral health caregivers in each of the primary care clinics. So when you would go to see your primary care physician, you would also get a mental health checkup as well as a physical checkup.
Parlay that over to the Bliss Journey, your book, because that is a big theme for the book in terms of tackling this head on, putting your story out there, and also offering a roadmap. So go ahead and dive into sharing the story of your book.
Sure, thanks. So when I was starting Master IT after John Louis so nicely kicked me out of the nest, I was sitting at home staring at a blue screen working on the business plan. I was just by myself, and literally God channeled 14 principles through me. And you're a singer and a songwriter, and you know that feeling when you feel like the words are just channeled through you, and that's exactly what
and it happens at all hours of the day and night. Take it when you get it.
And again, you can't make this stuff up because I couldn't come up with these. And I wrote as quickly as I could. And there's nothing particularly innovative about the principles. But what was interesting is I didn't know it at the time. But those principles were first made to prepare me for the trip I was going to go on as an entrepreneur. And entrepreneurialism is a full contact sport. And at this very moment, my heart just goes out and bleeds for all these organizations, all these people who are having to make very difficult decisions. And at some point, we're seeing the most beautiful things in people come out. But the stress and the strain of that is really just something else. So here I am 15 years on the other side. And again, I mentioned Javier Pena, one of our former Breakfast Club speakers. I was explaining the concept to him about 4 years ago, and he said, stop. He said, we're going to Skype every Wednesday night for an hour. He produces all of the Spanish-speaking commercials for St. Jude. He said, I ask people really good questions for a living. And he said, you're going to give really good answers, and the book will appear. And that's exactly what happened. And then I met my collaborator on the book who helped me finish it at a cityCURRENT event in Nashville. Maybe the cityCURRENT book is going to have to be a few volumes.
But I will say, for
Basic,
those who want to be authors and who are thinking of writing their own book, even for myself, I'm jealous of the way this evolved, because I really think it's a great model, because in many cases people struggle with how do they draw out all of their experiences, and to have someone like Javier interview you, capture all that footage, and then transcribe that, and then let you kind of have somebody then who's a trained professional look through that, put it together. That becomes a very, very powerful way to breathe life into these thoughts and, things that are in your head, but all of a sudden to literally bring it to paper.
yeah, and I think, again, coming through this crisis, so many people are going to have so many stories to tell.
Right.
I would really recommend them doing that, because, quite frankly, the title of the book is The Bliss Journey, Becoming the Hero of Your Own Story. And what I began to learn in my journey is that we're all wired to be connected, which is really difficult at this moment. We're finding all these innovative ways to try to stay connected, but just that physical presence is what we're really missing. But understanding that we're all connected, I really began to understand that, my story is your story and your story is my story. And yes, some may seem more dramatic than others, but I don't think any are any less impactful. And, my story might relate to somebody differently than yours, and somebody might relate better to you than to me. So I would encourage that for people to get their stories out there. But again, the book is 14 principles and 14 chapters, and each one of the chapters asks questions of the reader, and it also gives them some checklists, other resources to go through. So I think that's very timely now. I think God wrote this, I didn't. So there's no pride of authorship here, but we're in the process now of putting together a companion piece to the book, which is the Bliss Journal. It'll be downloadable on my website, we hope very soon, that basically condenses those questions and those checklists in a 15-week program, an introduction, and then 14 weeks to mirror the chapters, to help people basically self-navigate how they're doing, and to really either discover or reignite their passions in life, and really be able to come through this crisis with an attitude of mental health, not only their own well-being, but the well-being of others around them.
Share what Liz Murray wrote about you in this book, because I think it points out your vantage point, and it's different and unique. You're coming at it from the lens of a CEO, a business leader who's, taking off the mask, so to speak, in her words, but you're putting yourself out there and being vulnerable, not only with your personal side, but even professional side. And you're, like I said, you're kind of tackling this head on. And I think that's different than a clinical approach, or even like Ben Nimpton's approach. You're coming at it from a very corporate approach, yet with a personal side. And I think it's different. So talk about kind of Liz Murray's perspective on this, and then what we hope on your end to accomplish throughout this journey on your next chapter.
Thanks. Well, Lizzie has become a dear friend. She's like a little sister to me. She and her husband and 2 children live in New York City, so prayers go out to them, certainly right at this moment. Liz is the subject of the movie From Homeless to Harvard, so that tells her story right there. A brilliant person. And she said, Mike, when I met you, I put you in a box, like we all typically do. She and I both talked about going from judging to observing, right? And she said, I put you in a box because you look like just kind of this uptight male CEO who would never share his feelings. And she said, Mike, you're central casting for that Southern gentleman CEO who looks like he'd never share anything about his feelings at all. But on stage, whether it's virtual or physical, with some grace and humor, he pulls that mask off. And she said, I never saw that coming. So, if somebody like her encourages me to do it, that's what I'm going to do. But, I've been out there in the business, in the business environment talking about this for really 10 years. So this is just an extension of that. And I hope the book will give me the opportunity to be in front of many more audiences, whether it be virtually like we're doing now, or I hope eventually on stage speaking.
I think, you mentioned the reference to the singer-songwriter, and I think there's another kind of tie-in on that regard, where as a singer-songwriter, you learn that at first it's hard to be vulnerable, but yet the more you're vulnerable, the more people actually, the more you open up, the more people then are drawn in. And it opens them, especially when you talk about these difficult topics and subjects, who, with people really struggling through them, when they start seeing someone else that they look up to, or that they can relate to, whether it's a big name or even just a singer songwriter at a local level, they realize, wait a second, that's someone that's going through the same thing. And if it's okay for them and they're talking about it, then I can talk about it too. It gives them permission. It gives them freedom. And I think that's exactly what this is doing, is it's opening up the floodgates for others. And you've already seen this. I know for you speaking, you've done it a few times at different City Current events. And right off the bat, people come up afterward and they share what they're going through. So talk about it from that, opening the floodgates, and what you ultimately hope to accomplish through this book and the speaking and the journal and everything that you're going to be doing.
Right. Well, yeah, thanks for that lead in, because I'll give you one prime example, and you mentioned it. Without fail, Jeremy, 100% of the time, what I found is when I share my story, it gives other people the permission and the courage to tell their story. And when that happens, our walls come down, and then we become real human beings. And I think these crises that we're going through right now will give people the ability to do that. And when the walls come down, we realize we are connected, and we can really have a real conversation and be real human beings instead of human doings. And I found in my own career, particularly over the last 15 years at Master IT, the more transparent I was, I felt like the better leader I became, because people weren't intimidated by me. They were more truthful and honest with me. I just felt that connection, a deeper connection on a personal level. But to give you a specific example, and just as one, my wife was with me a month ago, and we were out shopping. And we happened to see somebody that I know. She'd never met him before. And he did not know that I'd sold Master IT. And he asked me what I was doing. And I told him about the book and speaking and what that was about. And he said, "Do you know that my father died by suicide?" I said, I had no idea. And then we went on to have a long conversation about that. And as we were getting ready to go, he said, "Can I ask you a question?" I said, "Sure." He said, "Have you ever thought about suicide?" And I said, "I have, and I have to talk about it in the book." He said, "I have too." Now, he said that to me, and we didn't know each other really well, and he'd never met my wife. This happens every time. So I know there's something powerful in that, to give people the permission and the courage. And with organizations like the Living Well Network, I'm also on the board of the Christian Psychological Center. I have resources that I can point people to, because I'm a layperson. I'm not a clinician. But I think that's very, very important, just to be real and to be transparent.
A couple more questions. Give us one, it doesn't have to be your favorite because we might save that for later, but give us one tenet from the book and what you hope people kind of take away from that specific either storyline or tenet.
Well, I say it over and over again in the book: nothing, and I mean nothing, is as it appears. Nothing. So what I mean by that is, everybody might look fine on the outside. Another one of your guests, Nora McInerney, terrible, thanks for asking. She destigmatizes that as well. People can look put together, but everybody, particularly now, everyone is traumatized and everyone is suffering. But everybody walks around carrying these steamer trunks of baggage around with them like they're okay. I mean, think about it, just our normal greeting. "How are you today, Jeremy?" "I'm great. How are you?" And the answer is, today, nobody's great. Nobody's great. So I think what I encourage people to do is just be honest and truthful and transparent. And when we do that, we can really be in a better position to help each other.
So the next question that I was going to tie back in is, so for everyone, we had Michael on. He's going to be on as a radio show interview too. So there's kind of an addendum to this. But you shared some great advice during that interview on just how we can kind of cope through what we're going through right now with the coronavirus. And you talked about obviously protecting your energy and even like consuming news in a short amount. But you also talked about prayer with your family. So go back to that. And in this segment, give us a little bit of how we can cope through this mentally and come out ahead on the other side.
Well, I think to recognize ourselves as full human beings and not human doings. And what I mean by that is it's not only the physical aspect, it's the mental aspect, it's the emotional aspect, and it's the spiritual aspect. So from a physical standpoint, because I have this really long family history of anxiety and depression, you know, I have to stay very physically fit. I mean, just like you would with heart disease. I mean, it's very important for somebody who struggles with depression to be physically active. So I'm looking out the window now and it's raining, but if it weren't, you know, I take an hour-long walk with my dog every day. Something about being with your pet, your animals now is so comforting, right? Because they love us no matter what's going on. We eat dinner together every night at our dinner table, and you've been at it, it's a round table, so it requires discussion. And we have an 18-year-old daughter, and you know the funny thing is that the last people an 18-year-old person wants to be with is their parents. But we've had such a great time reconnecting as a family. That's been very important. We have a cycle bar here in the house, so you know my daughter loves to do that, so we're joining in with her in the app on the TV to be able to cycle for 50 minutes each every day. And yes, we pray as a family. My wife and I do. That's very important as Christians to us, and it gives us the opportunity to pray for each other, pray for our family, pray for friends. It keeps us grounded spiritually and connected, and it gives us the opportunity to feel like we're doing something for people, even though we're in our own home, but we're crying out to God for His favor and for His healing, because so many people are suffering so much. And I could go on. I mean, I call my 84-year-old stepfather every day. I stay in touch by text with dear friends, just checking in, how you doing? Short stuff. I mean, but then when it's required, like tonight, I've got a Zoom chat with some former team members that I just want to check in and see how they're doing. I think there are a lot of positive ways. I know Michelle Obama yesterday on the Ellen Show gave an incredible list of things that she's doing. So I would encourage people to Google that are far more extensive than what I've just talked about. But I think right now we've got to look for positive wherever we can find it.
I like the fact too, you mentioned that you're watching comedies, together. And so I think that's kind of something that by just being able to be intentional, I think everything goes back to intention, being intentional with the time, being intentional with your efforts, being intentional with your energy. And so looking at everything from an intentional standpoint, as much as possible, helps to guide and protect that energy.
Yeah, I talk about that in the book, actually, that to me, it's two twins together. It's discipline and intention. So the intention is great, but obviously we have to have the discipline to go through that. I mean, another thing that I'm trying to do today is to maintain a routine every day, going to bed at the same time, waking up at the same time, getting dressed as if I'm going to a business meeting.
Right.
Because I'm having more and more of these discussions online. I think it's very important for us to find routine. Positive routines as humans, just to declutter our minds. But it's not only the intention; it's the discipline to do it.
Well, I think this is one of those that we'll have to check back in often, because on your end, you're obviously a wealth of just knowledge and so many stories. And like you said too, I mean, you were instrumental in starting and creating everything that is cityCURRENT, and so you have so many of those stories that together we can just have fun sharing and reminiscing, but they all have a lesson. And I think that's the cool thing, is that, you, especially on your end, you go through everything with this sense of joy and, just being present and experiencing what's in front of you. But at the same time, being mindful that within every experience, there's a lesson to be learned that you can then share with others. And I think that self-reflection is something that I've always admired on your end, because you are present, but at the same time, you're also looking for what's the nugget that I can take away and share with someone else. And I think that then becomes the powerful piece of you as a teacher, as much as anything else. And so I love that sense of wonder that you bring, but at the same time, that sense of reflection as well.
Well, thank you. And I think that's what the Bliss Journey is all about. I mean, it's all based on Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey. And, you know, every story has three parts: separation, initiation, which is trials, and return. And the return is not just for the hero, it's for the rest of the tribe. And how can we help each other? Because we're all going to make plenty of mistakes on our own. It's great to learn from other people as well. And we're all going to continue to go through heroes' journeys, not only through this trauma, but through many others. And what's important is, what do we have to give to other people? And look, power the good. It's the best tagline I've ever heard. That's what it's all about. That's what it's all about. Karma is a real thing. It's a real thing. What you put out there comes back.
I agree 100%. So tell all of our viewers where they can go: website, social media. How do they follow your story with J. Michael Drake?
Well, thank you. Well, I'll say this: it's fluid, and we're in the midst of pivoting right now. But it's real simple. The website is the letter J, michaeldrake.com. There you can find many resources. You'll see my story. You can actually download the first two chapters of the book and read that for free if you'd like to do that. And it's got all of my social media handles on it as well.
Well, Michael, thank you very much. You're a change maker, you're a friend, you're a role model, you're a mentor. You're so many things, so many titles I can layer on, but thank you for all you do. Greatly appreciate you coming on this show. Thank you to all of our viewers for watching, subscribing, liking, the whole nine yards, but thank you for tuning in, and we appreciate you. And once again, we hope that all of you remain safe and healthy. So, Michael, thank you, sir, for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me, and hello, and I love all of our cityCURRENT partners. Have a great day.